All right, everyone, thank you so much. We're very sorry about the mix-up. That was a little colder out there than it should be this time of year, let's put it that way.
It's been cold for a week.
Yeah, and they said it was going to be nice, but hey, what do they know?
It was 79 in New Hampshire today.
Oh, don't tell me that. Don't tell me that.
More.
All right, today we're going to have a presentation from the PPI CRS Committee here in Marshfield on flood insurance. So, what do we do as a committee? The Marshfield CRS PPI Committee, and I'll introduce the members we have here tonight, is a committee in Marshfield that organizes all of the activities for the community rating system. And the CRS program is implemented by the National Flood Insurance Program and gives credits to communities that go above and beyond the minimum standards for the NFIP's floodplain management program and rewards the community by giving discounts to your NFIP flood insurance policy. So, with that, I'm going to introduce the committee members we have here tonight. Myself, Joe Rossi, we have Tim Williams as our vice chair, Doris Crary as our town resident, Greg Guimont as the town planner, Nancy Pareca as the actual town designated CRS coordinator. So every town needs a government liaison to coordinate CRS, and that's Nancy. And that's it. And the other members of the committee are listed there, and this committee is basically made up of various stakeholders to represent the various stakeholders in the town of Marshfield. Oh, I should have waited to this slide to explain everything. So CRS basically has three goals. Reduce and avoid flood damage to insurable property, strengthen and support the insurance aspects of the NFIP, and foster comprehensive floodplain management. So, and you'll see there's a lot of stuff I won't read, but is up on the slides, and these are going up on we have a page on the town website, so these slides will be going up there after tonight's meeting. And so there's different classes, there's 10 classes of CRS, class 10 through 1, and because it goes backwards, because the lower the number, the better the class. Marshfield is a 7 now, which gives a 15% discount to all National Flood Insurance Program policies. Several other communities on the South Shore are 7, Situate, and I see representatives here from Situate. We have Quincy and Hull are all class 7s. So how do we get to a class 6? I know you're asking yourself that question. We're hard at work. Marshfield has the most number of points in the state. So we are the closest of any other community to being class 6. So we're working very hard to get there. Marshfield has been a class 6, which is a 20% discount in the mid-90s, thanks to Doris Crary here. So we have the right minds working on getting us to that next class. Through this outreach and other flood awareness and mitigation activities, Marshfield will continue to increase our CRS ratings. So if you're wondering, why now do you have a flood insurance outreach? We do it every spring, and we do a general outreach on floodplain management and insurance every fall. So be on the lookout for those outreaches as we continue to do them. So tonight's presentation, we're going to give a quick history of the NFIP, nothing too long and boring. We're going to talk about what is a flood as defined by the NFIP. We're going to be talking about risk rating 2.0, insure your property, what to do in a claim, mitigation activities and resources, and then of course a question and answer. If you're here to ask questions, we do have insurance resources in the audience here tonight, and of course our committee which can answer any questions. I would be amiss if I didn't call out we have conservation here, and we have one of our selectmen, Jim Kilcoyne, here tonight, so thank you for being here. Any other Marshfield representation I didn't call out tonight?
Greg Guimont?
Oh, well, yes, we called Greg out. I'm not going to make you stand up this time.
The concrete chair, right?
Oh, yes, thank you for coming to Conservation Commission.
Nancy from ZBA.
Yes, Nancy Brent, thank you, Bill. I should have had Bill do all the introductions.
Anybody else don't hide from me? I'll be quiet now, Joe.
Awesome. No, thank you. That's great. The support from the town is huge, so thank you very much. All right, so let's briefly talk about the history of the NFIP. The National Flood Insurance Act established the NFIP back in 1968, so 64 years ago, almost. And there were several reasons for the act, but mainly there was no affordable method of getting flood insurance. So the government had to do something because we were in a time back in 1968 after some major hurricanes and storms when most insurance companies removed flood as a named peril from their insurance policies. So that started after the 1929 Mississippi flood. So named peril flood gets removed starting 1929 all the way to 1968 with really no affordable method for flood insurance. Now there are really, some will argue four, but I call them the three legs of the NFIP stool. And let me just back up. First of all, it should say September 30th of 2022. That's when the next expiration of the NFIP is. Because it has to be reauthorized every so many years. I mean, well, at this point, it's every so many months, it seems like.
It used to be 25 years.
Yeah, well, it needs to be longer than the 3 weeks that we're getting at this point. We're lucky we got from now to September 30th of this year. So it gets pushed down the road so many times, this slide typically I forget to update because I've had to update it 3 weeks at a time in some cases. But the goals of the program are to increase flood insurance coverage, identify flood-prone areas, that's our mapping program, require communities, homeowners to participate in order to receive federal assistance. Marshfield is one of 22,000 communities nationwide that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. So you'll see the three main stools are flood mapping, flood insurance, and floodplain management. Marshfield has all three. That is the history of the NFIP. So what is a flood? So if you're wondering, well, what is a flood? If I've got one, how do I know? We all think of, there's various types of flooding Marshfield experiences, but as defined in most flood insurance policies, because there are, we'll talk later about NFIP and private flood, two distinctly and different policies. It's all this language here. Really, it's water coming over the land from off of the property onto the property. That is essentially the definition of a flood as covered by your flood insurance policy. There are other definitions of flood for other reasons within federal programs, within private programs, but for your insurance, this is essentially the boiled down definition of a flood. So if you have water coming over the seawall, down the road, onto your property, and it wasn't there before, over the land, you probably have a defined flood. Now, many of you are probably here because of this momentous change in flood insurance that's happened in the last several months, called Risk Rating 2.0. It has changed essentially everything that we knew about flood insurance. So under Risk Rating 2.0, the NFIP is changing. So it's a total redesign of our rating structure. And in quotations, this is a FEMA quote, delivering rates that are fair, clear, and meet current industry standards. Essentially trying to get the National Flood Insurance Program's rating to act like a private company that has been rating other insurance lines for decades. No longer binary. What does that mean? We're no longer caring for insurance purposes about A zones, B zones, X zones. It's based on graduated risks that correlate with real-world conditions. And we no longer, after all these years of caring about zone and base flood elevation, we no longer care about them for insurance purposes. So you'll see on the left-hand side is what we call now the legacy system, the one that we've all grown up with, used to rate by base flood, the flood maps, the foundation type, the elevation of the building, the 1% annual chance of flooding, and then fees and surcharges. Now, we care about a lot more. So we care about distance to water, stream order, so how big or small is the river you're near, the type of flooding. There are now 5 distinct flood types. Ground elevation to the first floor height. We don't care about base flood elevation. Construction type, so now we care whether it's frame or masonry. The cost to rebuild, what is that replacement cost coverage? Or replacement cost to your building in relation to the coverage. And then a broader range of flood frequencies. And the fees and surcharges, those didn't go anywhere. So what I've done is I have taken, squishing my left-hand side, it says preferred risk policy. What I've done is I've taken some of the key changes with the National Flood Insurance Program with Risk Rating 2.0, and I've done a side-by-side. This is what I feel is the easiest way to understand some of the big changes that have already happened starting October of last year and then April of this year. Preferred risk policy. So in the legacy system, structures that were not in those high-risk flood zones were able to purchase low-risk policies, and structures that are not insured as RCBAPs could purchase the preferred risk policy and RCBAPs are condo buildings, could purchase the preferred risk policy. So this was a low-cost policy that could be purchased in low-risk zones. Under risk rating 2.0, purchase and availability of the preferred risk policy is gone. So preferred risk policies are no longer available under risk rating 2.0. However, those that have them will be grandfathered into risk rating 2.0. So those aren't, if you have a preferred risk policy, it's not going away. It's going to slowly either increase or immediately decrease. And that's my next point. Rates for these areas may be lower or higher than the current preferred risk policy that was available. So it's not that they're all going up. Some actually could go down as well. Elevation certificates. So in the legacy system, elevation certificates were required for new construction and could give beneficial rating to structures based on elevation. So they were required for some and not for others. The elevation certificate information that we used to use when we would have one would be base flood elevation, height of the lowest floor, the community map information. Those were all critical elements. But now, FEMA determines their own first floor height. So we no longer require elevation certificates. An elevation certificate could be used, so we don't want to say that they're not required and don't use them. They're actually extremely beneficial. I will tell you that in my experience, I would say more than 60% of the time an elevation certificate has a beneficial impact on the rate. So I actually think they're probably more valuable now than they ever were before. But they are totally optional. And I will tell you where this is becoming key is getting somebody to the closing of a house. If somebody's trying to close on a home in a high-risk zone, and in the prior system an elevation certificate was required to rate that policy, they would be held up looking for data and looking for the elevation certificate or something. But now, worry about the elevation certificate after you close, get through the closing. That's really where this has become of great value to the housing market and system. It says CRS. So huge benefit, especially when we talk about the town of Marshfield. CRS discounts in the legacy system were really only for those that were not only involved in CRS, right, so like Marshfield, but they were also only given to policies in the A or V zones, or if you were a full risk rated X zone, which very few policies were. I think Marshfield out of 1,700 had 30 or so fully risk rated X zone policies. So that wasn't helping. But in 2.0, all NFIP policies in all zones receive the CRS discount. So this is going to expand those eligible for the CRS discount. So we talk about those preferred risk policies phasing out, but as they phase out, they now get the CRS discount. So this is kind of a, we might not like PRPs phasing out, but we definitely like CRS being applied, especially in towns like Marshfield, where we're doing so much work to get the CRS credit. And mitigation. In the legacy system, there was no significant benefit to elevating mechanical equipment. Flood vents put into a foundation can make a significant impact on rating under some conditions, like if you have a crawl space you're retrofitting or something like that. So good, bad. Under risk rating 2.0, elevation of mechanical to the next higher floor gives a small but still valuable discount. And in fact, I will call out Marshfield for having a bylaw that allows a small enclosure to be built on the first floor of the building to move your utilities to without affecting your setbacks. I think it's 32 square feet. And before that was great from a risk reduction perspective. Now it actually can give premium discounts if somebody does that. So this is a really good thing for a town like Marshfield. The flood vent reduction is, in premium, is diminished, but is still critical. In a time when we are seeing premiums in some cases go up, having flood vents where it's applicable is still valuable. And I will tell you one benefit I didn't put up here is that the venting now applies no matter what zone. So before it used to only matter in A zones, you can now get venting credit in V zones. So that is a benefit. That's actually a pretty significant benefit. Okay, now you're thinking, wow, so much has changed, but so much has not. So things that will not change are the existing legislative issues. Of course, we know that in many facets of our lives, those issues, legislative issues, are just unresolved. But specifically for us in the flood world, it's affordability, right? So for years, we've been talking about trying to get an affordability framework for the NFIP, forgiveness of the debt, and annual rate increases. Those are set by Congress. The available amount of insurance, so $250,000 and $500,000 for commercial, those are not changing. Mandatory purchase. Remember we said for insurance, throw out the maps and their base flood elevation, well not so for requirements of flood insurance and for how to build your structure. They still are required for floodplain management, and mandatory purchase requirements are still in effect. Policy forms. So for now, the coverage you're getting is not changing. When you look at the flood, and we actually talk about coverages here in just a second. So FEMA is looking to change those policy forms, but they currently are not changing. The CRS program, so while it's expanded for who gets the credit, the credits themselves have not changed. The write your own commissions, so the amount of money that the insurance companies get paid, that's an congressional issue. The LOMA program, if you want to get removed by a LOMA, it's still the same. The available amounts of coverage under ICC, which again, that's basically part of the coverages in the policy form, those are not changing. And then, most importantly, the assignment of a flood policy is still critical. Because if you're seeing a premium go up and you sell your home, the only way to have the next person assume that glide path of increases is by assigning that flood policy. So that is still critical. Now, what is the impact? So each state has different impacts. You'll see I put nationally, state, and we can actually look at the town of Marshfield. So I did the state numbers on the left-hand side, and in the screen, I'll read these off because I know this font's small and it's hard to read, so I'll read them off in a second. In Mass, 39% of policies will see a decrease. That means premiums go down year one of risk rating 2.0. 49% will either see no increase or a slight increase, and 12% will see the more significant increases under risk rating 2.0. No increase, this is extremely important, can be more than 18% a year. So if you see your policy is going to increase, 18% is the most it will increase in any single year. Full risk rates will now be shown on your flood policy. So if you're wondering what is my policy going up to, your full risk rate is stated on your policy. If you have, one slide I didn't put up here is when this all started or when it is going to affect you. If you bought a new flood policy starting October 1st of this past year, all new business was rated in risk rating 2.0. If you're a renewal, so you have a policy today and it's going to renew, that started April 1st, so we're only not even 2 months in. So for example, if your policy renews in June, you have not yet gone through this process yet. So, or July or August, you're still waiting for that renewal process. So starting April 1st of this year is when existing policies started renewing into risk rating 2.0. So now in Marshfield. In Marshfield, the most policies, I don't think I can zoom, I used to be able to zoom with this thing. So I'll read it to you though. You'll see 884 of Marshfield's roughly 1,700 policies are either not going to increase or decrease or see a $10 a month increase. So that's a bulk of our policies. The next highest number of policies in the town of Marshfield are going down more than $100 a month in premium. So that's over 300 policies in the town of Marshfield that are seeing a significant decrease in their premium upon renewal. Remember I said increases have a cap, decreases don't. If you're going down, you see it immediately. That renewal premium goes down. And you'll see the numbers on the top end are real small. a total of less than 200, actually a little bit more than 200 policies, just a little bit, are seeing more than a $10 a month increase. So I would say Marshfield made out pretty well with risk rating 2.0. I think it's really going to benefit our policyholders here in town. One note I was going to make, and now I forget, so I'll come back to it. Okay, somebody's projected to see a big increase. What do? There are options. So private flood, remember I was going to talk about this, the difference between NFIP and private flood insurance. There is now a robust market of private, non-federal insurance options. Private flood insurance. Most of this market is what we call non-admitted, or it's not regulated by the insurance commissioner from a rating perspective. Insurance commissioner is still regulated, just not the rates that they're offering. It means it's not regulated. It does not mean that it's not allowed. If you see on your policy it's non-regulated, that just means that the insurance commissioner doesn't tell them how high or low to make their rates. Many of these are Lloyd's of London. There are also reinsurers taking risks, but that's mostly in the commercial marketplace, directly taking risks. And admitted programs also exist. Those would be regulated. There is one in Massachusetts I know of by Right Flood. I'm not plugging it, I just know that that's the only program that I know of that's regulated. But not many. And like I said, there's only one I know of in Massachusetts. Endorsements to homeowners is starting to become a thing. And you'll see on the right side of the screen, again, this is not really, I'm not going to go through each one. You'll see NFIP versus private and the different, things on what makes it one or the other. And so these slides, again, will be on the town website probably in the next week or so. You'll be able to download and look at these. Okay, so now, why would you insure your property for flood? Well, FEMA estimates that 40% of losses come from low-risk flood zones. That is a huge number. And in Marshfield, we are lucky to have some of the higher uptake in flood insurance in our region. But still, we have, I know, a huge uninsured problem. Our nation does, Marshfield does, everyone does. Your homeowner's insurance will obviously not cover a flood. If you have a bursted pipe, that is not a flood. If you have ground seepage, not because of a flood, it is not a flood. And that gets confused all the time. If you have ground seepage because out your window there is a flood, that is a covered loss. So these are important things to know, that flood is not covered under your homeowners. Flood coverage can either be purchased from the federal government or private insurers, we just mentioned, and a separate policy is typically what you would purchase, so a separate flood policy. Contents-only insurance is available for renters. I think that is one of the lowest uptakes in policies is purchased by renters. For most flood policies, there's a 30-day wait. Private usually only has either a 14-day or 0-day wait. But do not rely on disaster assistance. These numbers speak for themselves. During Hurricane Harvey, $106,000 was the average NFIP payout. The average disaster assistance payout was $6,000. So again, these numbers speak for themselves. Just a little piece about choosing deductibles. This is straight out of an NFIP booklet. And I'm not going to go really through this, but I'd like to put this up here because I get this question all the time. Well, what deductible should I take? I will tell you through Risk Rating 2.0, FEMA has taken the huge swing. I think it used to be a 60% difference between the $2,000 deductible and the $10,000 deductible in your premium. Now, you're lucky if it's 10%. So by taking that huge factor out, the deductible issue doesn't become, it's still a factor, it's just not as big of a factor. So, and then the coverage. So a lot of the times I get, well, my flood policy really doesn't cover a lot. Well, it depends on where your items are. In your basement area, it won't cover a ton. In everything else, it will actually cover a lot. I'll never forget, I did a ride-along with a claims adjuster here in Marshfield. We did a split-level claim. Bottom level was finished, and it was technically a basement, so they didn't get a ton of coverage. They did get their drywall and all that. But on what's the split level? 1,500 square feet, 2,000 square feet here in Marshfield, the cleanup costs were over $15,000 alone, and the NFIP paid every penny of that. So cleanup can sometimes be your biggest cost. So, and I actually mentioned that later. So buy flood insurance, and for the very least, to get your foundation sprayed, get your walls sprayed, get your cleanup done, because that's a big issue. So here's kind of what it will cover. I'm not going to go through all this, and this is exactly, so under your building coverage in your lower levels, you're going to have coverage for actually more than you think if you buy building coverage. Drywalls, your drywall, electrical outlets, fuel tanks and fuel in them, furnaces, water heaters, all that stuff. And you'll see here's where the restrictions are in those colored areas. That's where you're going to have coverage restriction, meaning that you're going to have very limited coverage for your contents. In fact, those are the only 3 contents covered in those areas of your building. Washers, dryers, if you choose contents coverage. Food freezers and the food in them, but not refrigerators, which I know, kind of strange. I actually had somebody claim this one time though. They had a big food freezer, and I said, why are you filing like $1,000 claim in your basement? He goes, because I have a food freezer and all the food in it. So I thought that was interesting. Portable and window air conditioners, but they have to be plugged in and functioning. You cannot have them stored down there and receive coverage. Yes, I know. So again, here's what the policy does not cover. So these are very specific, right? Seawalls, hot tubs, and swimming pools. Don't expect your seawall to be covered. Most self-propelled vehicles, such as cars, including their parts, but vehicles servicing the building are covered. Property and belongings outside of a building. So basically anything that has to be contained within the building. But cleanup and debris removal is covered. I told you that claim right along I did. I found the value of that line so incredible. So if you do have, like, think about salt water up against your building, it will cover the removal of that. And again, really to hit the point home, even with risk rating 2.0, the average flood insurance policy as of today is about $1,000. So really, if you live in a floodplain, in Marshfield, that would be any shaded area, and you know, Marshfield has conservation areas and wetlands too that might not be designated floodplains by FEMA, but are still areas that are susceptible to flooding, right? And you have a higher chance of having a flood than you do a fire, which is an amazing statistic. And again, 40% of those floods come from low-risk zones. And CRS has a guide for realtors. It's actually what was handed out to all of you. So we don't really have a handout for CRS, but what I did want to pass around was our realtor guide. We try to get real estate professionals to hand this out to people purchasing and selling homes in the town. So it's just got some really good basic info, and our website's on there. So I want to make sure you all have that. So what to do in a claim? Well, damage or improvement may force you to elevate. This is an area where Marshfield is really becoming a trendsetter statewide and implementing our substantial damage and substantial improvement guidelines. Substantial improvement and substantial damage are essentially the same thing. Substantial damage means that you've been damaged more than 50% or more, exceeds 50%, I'm sorry, it equals or exceeds 50% of the building's market value. And in town, well, let me explain this first. Substantial improvement. Substantial damage means that you've been damaged more or equal to 50% of the building's value, but that also means you now need substantial improvement because you've been substantially damaged. That is why they are essentially the same thing. Now, if damage is done in a storm and you are determined to be substantially damaged, the adjuster will be the first one to the scene, right? The town, you think about the 2018 nor'easters, think about towns like Marshfield, Situate, Quincy, when we had dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of buildings with a ton of damage. I mean, just obliterated. The adjuster is probably going to be the first one on the scene because the building inspector and the towns are just going crazy with trying to operate their departments. And they probably won't be the first ones there. And they also probably don't know exactly which buildings are substantially damaged. Your adjuster will. So they estimate the claim. So they go to the house and they look at it and they say, this building is substantially damaged, because they have to come up with the value of the claim in relation to the value of the home. So then they send that to the community. That is not your substantial damage designation. They just send that to the town and they go, we think this house is substantially damaged. You should go take a look at it. So that is going to trigger the community to go out there and start to take a look at it. Or in less severe events where there's not wide devastation, typically the permit, the homeowner will go and pull a permit. At least you hope that they would, because they have damage and you would think you would know where the damage is, so you would hope that they would go and pull a permit. So the permit is applied for by the resident. The community then is going to ask the contractor for a detailed estimate of work to be done. So this is going to be very detailed. This is going to be your outlets. This is going to be your wiring. This is going to be your studs. It's going to be everything that's going to be done. If that value the contractor comes up with is equal to or greater than 50% of the pre-damage value of the home, then the building commissioner will make a substantial damage or substantial improvement designation. And substantially damaged buildings must also be brought up to, there's one other thing. Back to the market value. So FEMA puts in all of their guidance this word market value. What is market value? Well, in Marshfield, the initial substantial damage determination is made by the assessor's database, which is obviously low. If somebody wants to challenge the substantial damage, substantial improvement designation, they can get an independent appraiser to do an appraisal that will obviously show a building worth probably more. So that is allowed. That is the appeal process that you would go through. And I know Doris has, and she's shaking her head, she's done this a few times. So, so that's kind of how that all works. I know that was kind of detailed, but it's important because Marshfield's really, we're really trying to improve substantial improvement, substantial damage designations. One, because CRS is requiring us to, and two, because it really should be something that, well, there's three reasons. One, because CRS is requiring us to. Two, because FEMA just announced that they will be requiring most communities in the country to come up with a substantial damage program or plan that is also going to be part of the CRS committee because it's a requirement, well, not a requirement, but we actually can get 300 points for doing that. So we will be overseeing that. And then the third reason is because it's just good floodplain management. And then, of course, after a claim, even if you don't file a claim, document the storm damage to your property or your area. And Marshfield has really done something cool. Right before and after a storm, the police send a drone up and down the coast, and they take pictures of our coastal infrastructure because it helps them get paid by FEMA and also helps us understand what was there before the event. So photos and descriptions can help the community officials and document other important information about our region's storm activity. There's actually, and I probably should put this link on our town website. I believe Coastal Zone Management has a photo documentation app where they collect this type of data to figure out the trends in our coast. So that's very helpful for them. And then after a storm, this is really cool again. This is a FEMA ready.gov one-pager that tells you what to do after a storm. I mean, some of these seem pretty obvious, but if you go to the site, once this is posted, print this out, stick it on your fridge, it's really a really good resource. And then I think this is also an excellent resource, so we put that in there. Kind of tells you to do what to do before, during, and after a storm. So before, make an inventory of valuables. I cannot tell you how many times I've been to a claim and the adjuster goes, okay, so what was here? Well, right now there's rocks and sand, but before that you had valuables there. So go around your house, even if it's done once a year, take photos of your house, upstairs, downstairs, any place. Create a household emergency plan and emergency kit. Have a copy of your insurance policy and contact information on hand. That's also very important because when you're standing there and your house is devastated by a flood, you want to know immediately who to call and get an adjuster out there. Adjuster, again, is going to be your first line of defense to start getting your claim moving. During a storm, obviously, turn off your gas if you have to, or electricity with the main switches to avoid a fire. Remain in the upper portion of your home or higher ground. Avoid walking around or driving through floodwaters. If If only we could give this presentation to the entire state so they wouldn't come down here during a storm. But that is why we try to deploy signs that say don't come down to Marshfield. That's actually an activity that we help coordinate. Then after, return home only when you've been given the all clear. I mean, some of these are pretty obvious, but they're also very valuable. Again, a good one-pager to print out, stick it on the fridge, keep it somewhere in your house. Mitigation. So, rates can depend on foundation elevation. Again, remember, we don't care about zone and base flood elevation for rating anymore. But what we do care about is how high up the building is in relation to the ground. So this still becomes critical. So if you can see here, this building, right, is elevated at base flood elevation. Of course, in Marshfield, we have to go, in Massachusetts, we have to go higher than base flood. But the point is foundation matters, right? The higher, go higher up. And actually the next slide is a pretty cool slide. But different zones require different foundation types for new construction. I mean, that's still the case. Remember, floodplain management standards are not changing. Different foundations affect costs differently. The higher elevated you are, the lower the cost. That is still the case. Now, this is a very confusing spreadsheet. There are a lot of numbers on here, but I want to highlight something. FEMA very recently released the discounts that premiums will be receiving based on different elevations in risk rating 2.0. This was previously not released. What's important to keep in mind is like slab on grade, you can see the numbers are not that great when you're at, or actually they're all not that great at the low, like 0 on the left-hand side, that's your first floor height. So in relation to your lowest grade now, not base flood elevation, you go 0 to, 25 feet. And in fact, in the full spreadsheet, FEMA notes, we understand people will not elevate their house to 25 feet above the ground. So it's a little extreme. But the point here is that you still get significant premium discounts the higher you elevate. And what's really cool is that it used to be capped at 4 feet above the flood elevation. Now we can go all the way up to, like I said, 25 feet above ground, right? We're not talking about the flood. I know Tim's laughing. That's pretty high. I mean, you're looking at like a skyscraper.
Right.
But even at 8 or 9 feet, right? Again, ground. So we have houses elevated 10 feet to your first floor, right on piles, Plymouth Ave, areas like that. You're getting a 60 with elevated without enclosure. So the big houses on stilts are receiving a 61% discount by being that high up. That's a really good discount. So what the point here in driving home is that elevation still matters, and it's actually probably more important now than it's ever been. Because if we look at the other mitigation factors, while they are important, they're in the single digits now. Only elevating a building gives you double-digit discounts, so very important. So, in summary, nor'easters cause most of the flood hazards in Marshfield. We know that. It's actually documented in our hazard mitigation plan. Nor'easters can occur at any time of the year, but are more prevalent in the winter months. We just saw a nor'easter that didn't make its way up here that devastated the Carolinas, if anybody's watched the news, the houses that have fallen into the ocean. A hurricane may last for hours, but a nor'easter may last for days, with at least one high tide at its peak, resulting in the most severe flooding. So, for the storm threatens, know your flood risk. So here, we're going to go into a few resources. If you want to find out your flood risk, Marshfield does have a great mapping tool. And Greg, I checked the other day, you've been keeping it right up to date. The most recent flood layer is on there, so it's a great resource for people to go and look up their flood information. The Ventris Library or Planning Department has flood risk information. A CRS activity was to keep all of our flood information at the Ventris Library. So you can actually go there, look at our maps, look at all the information that we have on flooding. Contact your insurance agent. We have a couple insurance experts here in the room tonight. Risk rating 2.0, no longer can we make generalizations about risk. They have to be done by your insurance agent. Just can't be done anymore. So I can't look at a house in Marshfield and go, I think, we used to be able to say that's about X, Y, Z in premium. Can't do that anymore because risk rating 2.0 rates every building differently. So just keep in mind, talk to your insurance agent. And then of course, visit our website. You've got it on the sheet that was handed out. and you'll find our website. And then a couple other places to get information. Building department, in fact, zone and map information should be found at the building department because that's where we get credit for getting that information as the building department. Planning department, I think Greg has some mapping up there still and can talk to you about some of the planning requirements around floodplain construction. CRS coordinator, Nancy's office, obviously Nancy has a ton of information. I think Nancy, you still have that rack of information outside your office, so go get a bunch of that information. Town website, CRS website, I think it's actually that, don't use that URL, I have to update that. But the bottom line is don't lose your investment, get flood insurance now before the storm. So with that, we are complete with our presentation tonight. Do I have any questions from anyone in the audience? Yes, I'll start in the front and go in the back.
Does any part of the land formation contribute to, for instance, the large dune or seawall, or does any of that contribute to
the rating?
To the rating?
Sure. So ground elevation does count now more than, actually counts now, never did before. So for the rating perspective, I have a client I'm working on in New Jersey, and the river is like half a mile away, but the premium is extraordinarily high. And he goes, why? Why is my premium? The river's not in a flood in an X zone. Well, if you take a measurement tool and you go like this across the land, so take the land and go like that, he sits down here, and the land goes like this, and that's why his premium's so high, because FEMA's calculating that area probably will fill with water and go out to the river that's a half mile away. So ground elevation definitely plays a role in risk rating 2.0. So those that are sitting on low-lying flatlands are going to see a lot higher, I won't say a lot higher, but a higher premium than maybe those sitting up higher elevation, land elevation-wise. In terms of seawalls, coastal infrastructure, from the perspective of whether it itself is giving a discount, it's probably not. FEMA has not really talked a lot about how their coastal or levee structures are affecting premium. They have, but they haven't. They are saying that levees that are accredited and not accredited are giving premium discounts, but they haven't mentioned whether that's carried over to coastal structures. I have a feeling it isn't, but I think there's more to come on that. So right now, assume it's just the ground elevation that's affecting premium. And a question in the back.
Yeah. I'm embarrassed by how little I know about all of this, but
It's okay.
I have a policy that I inherited when we bought the house.
Sure.
With the Hartford, and I'm just wondering, has anything? I contacted my agent and they said, well, you'll be notified. I haven't been notified of anything, but has anything changed with regards to that?
Do you know when your renewal notice is, or when does your policy renew?
July.
Okay, so typically you're probably billed about 45 to 7, actually I think it might be 70 days before the renewal, you'll receive a renewal notice, between 45 and 70. That's when you'll be notified of any changes. What road, if I don't mind asking, what road are you on? Are you in Marshfield?
Yeah, Island Street.
Island Street, okay. So that area is pretty low-lying. I don't know whether premiums there are going to increase significantly. I haven't seen anything to indicate that, but your renewal notice will let you know whether you're going up or down. Because if you're going up in price, your premium will be what it is today plus 18%.
And that maxes out.
And that maxes out right this year at that. If it's going down, you'll see a renewal notice with a number that's less. So that's how you'll know what direction you're going.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Lisa.
How does this affect SRO policies?
I'm glad you asked that. Severe repetitive losses. Buildings that have had 4 or more losses, 2 of which, of $5,000 or more, 2 of which in the last 10 years. Well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is under risk rating 2.0, all claims read 0 after your renewal. Now, those that are severe repetitive losses will still receive what we call the severe repetitive loss surcharge. I think it's at 15%. But your losses won't count against you for any other reason. So you'll be given a 15% surcharge, and your premium will be rated as however risk rating 2.0 comes up with a premium. So whatever they calculate it as, that's it. No losses will count against you, and you'll be charged 15% more on top of your premium. The other good news is severe repetitive losses were typically the highest paying premiums. The most a single family dwelling with no losses, okay, key is no losses, so technically everyone has no losses on day one. The most that a single family dwelling with no losses will pay is $12,750. So if you pay more than that, you will see your premium go down to $12,750. So that is a key element of risk rating 2.0. That number cannot be exceeded for a house with no losses. Yes.
Okay, so when you say house with no losses, is there a drop-off period? Let's say, there were severe repetitive losses, but they dropped off 2 years ago.
Yep.
It's been 12 years clear,
Sure.
no.
It's a 20-year rolling period now, 20-year rolling. So technically your rating, even though if you go look in your, say you ask FEMA for your loss history, you'll see the losses, they'll show all the losses. So we're not talking about what FEMA shows, we're talking about how it affects your rating, what affects your premium. When you renew into risk rating 2.0, FEMA will consider severe repetitive losses with no losses for rating purposes with the 15% surcharge. Then any loss that occurs after you renew into risk rating 2.0 will count against your premium for a rolling 20-year period. So that loss will fall off after 20 years. So that's how long FEMA looks. Yeah, it's a long time. It's a long time.
Are they going to keep covering fires?
The wildfires, yeah. So it's a 20-year rolling period. So, and that goes to every policy. So severe repetitive losses are not alone in this. So if any policy has a loss, the first loss will now trigger a premium increase, and I don't know what that increase is. We don't really know what, like percentage-wise, what the increase will be. But then that claim will stay on your rating to adversely affect your rating for a 20-year period. And then after 20 years, it falls off and you become clean, no losses, assuming you don't have any more. So as you accumulate losses, they all fall within, they'll move, the 20-year rolling period will continue. So that is a change. I usually don't talk about that because it is a little, I've simplified it somewhat. It's a little complicated to understand, but just know that losses will affect and your premium after the first loss and roll off after 20 years, starting whenever the loss happened.
Don't you think, Joe, that for people, I've always recommended that people not put in for small claims. And I would say that that's a very good reason, because you kind of have to look that you might get $5,500, let's say that was your loss, but you might over the 20 years pay out $10,000. So had you never put the loss in, you'd have been better off.
Yeah, I think preventative measures, to your point, I'll put it that way, are very helpful to prevent future claims. And I would say that, because we don't really have a clear idea of what that percentage is that would cause, like how much your policy could increase after your first claim, within reason, I would say, higher deductibles are good for that reason, right? Because it prevents you from wanting to file a claim. I've dealt with a lot of claims in my professional life in the tens of thousands, and of course we would never advocate for you to not file a claim for that, but I think Doris has a good point. Higher deductibles certainly help with claims that are smaller that could adversely affect premiums in a worse way than the claim.
The other thing I would say is things like our decks, which are the things that are most frequently damaged, we don't get paid for those.
Correct.
So minus all that out before you decide to file a claim.
The good
You're not
news
gonna get
is,
money for it.
Yeah.
don't do it.
Well, the good news is they will not count a closed without payment against you. So if you do file a claim and it's your deck, and you don't really get paid anything on decks, and they come out and the adjuster says, well, we can't pay you on that, that's called what we call a closed without payment or a CWAP. And CWAPs do not count against your claim history. So if you think you have a large claim, like a deck, and you have an adjuster come out because, you're just like, I should have them come out in case it's more and it's not, and they close it without payment, then it is not counted against. So that is the good thing. That is the one good thing.
Can you talk a little bit about the portability between private and FIP or NFIP and private back and forth?
It's a good point. So Tim's asking, can I talk just a minute about NFIP and private, kind of going back and forth and the affordability factors between the two. So private and NFIP vary, as I put up on the screen, in terms of the way they price, how they price, where they price, very differently. We are finding, and by we I mean industry, is finding that in some cases the NFIP is actually cheaper now than it was before. So those that all moved over to private flood, over the last 5 years, are getting quotes on NFIP, and they're like, whoa, I was paying, $10,000 with NFIP. I went to a private policy for $3,000, and the NFIP is now $3,500, and my private's now $4,500, because things go down and up. So for those, I would suggest getting a quote. If you have a private flood policy, I suggest having your agent quote you both an NFIP policy and a private policy at the time of your renewal. Just a good suggestion.
Just make sure you do it 30 days prior.
Yeah, because there is an 30-day wait for the NFIP. So make sure that you are getting those quotes well ahead of time, because if you do decide to move to the NFIP, as Tim and I have found out in our professional lives, it is a little bit too late, and you'll have a gap in coverage if you try changing, and there's a 30-day wait for the NFIP. So good point. It's something we're seeing now because of risk rating 2.0. All right, get a question here.
Could I ask, what do you see as the future of the NFIP with all this
It's a good question.
extension and extension and extension?
So two different futures. We're talking legislatively and premium and rating wise. Legislatively, I think Congress has, for better or for worse, kicked the can because they wanted to see what risk rating 2.0 would do. There's a hearing May 26th on the National Flood Insurance Program in Congress. I don't know who's testifying yet. I think Pew Charitable Trust, who's done a lot of work with the NFIP, they're sending somebody to testify. There's Taxpayers for Common Sense is sending somebody to testify. But the hearing is being held more for some grandstanding by the southern state legislators to try to make some noise on risk rating 2, being against risk rating 2.0. So I don't think anything substantive will happen during the hearing. But the reason I'm mentioning any of this is because there will be legislative activity in the near future to, I think, extend the National Flood Insurance Program for 5 years, create an affordability framework, which is missing in all of this. There's no affordability framework, and some other low-hanging fruit. I think you will see that, probably not this year, but probably next year. So I think that'll be a 5-year extension, and I think it will finally get things extended long-term. In terms of the rating, the actual, where is the NFIP policy-wise going? The NFIP expects to lose 15% of its book of business in the next 3 years. I don't see that happening. I think the NFIP, is just, with risk rating 2.0, it makes it an option that is just like the other options, right? It's easier to quote now, it's easier to rate, it's easier to use. The rates are, in some cases, actually better than they were before, and all these different things. So I think what you're going to, and they're also coming out with new policy forms. They're going to expand their coverages. They're going to offer 9 different forms according to what type of building you have. If you have a trailer, it's a different coverage form. If you have a house, it's a different coverage form. So all the different forms will come out. So I think, while many are skeptical, I personally am of the belief that the National Flood Insurance Program will become an insurer like many others. They might not explode in the amount of policies they have, but if anyone watches the news with all the flooding we have as a nation, I don't think they're going anywhere. So I think they're still going to be around. They're still going to be trudging along around 4 to 5 million policies. I think that's right about where the NFIP will be. So we're getting near the end of the time. Does anyone have any final questions? Okay. I want to thank my committee. I want to thank the representatives from Marshfield who were government that were here. I want to thank all the viewers from the recording tonight. Thank you everyone for coming. There are some insurance experts here. If you want to raise your hands, if you guys want to talk to the insurance experts in the room, go right ahead, and thank you all for coming. Thank you. Oh, one last thing before you leave, because we were locked out. Just sign your name. We don't call anyone. We just need this for our record keeping to get credit. Just sign your name and